The world of offshore powerboats, one of the most unique forms of motorsport. Crews of up to 4 individuals ride herd on over 4,000 horses, generated by as many as 4 power plants, screaming through the seas at top speeds topping 140 miles per hour. Our look at professional offshore powerboat racing focuses on the waters of the Florida Keys, specifically Marathon, Florida. It's here where the Gulf of Mexico meets the Atlantic that many classic racing battles have taken place. And this is also one of the most treacherous areas when it comes to water conditions. Unlike most forms of motorsports where the driver has a consistent track on which to compete, offshore racers must contend with the constantly changing surface of the sea. Here, driver Chris Lavin and his throttleman Don Roberts are in the biggest water on the course when they strike an itinerant wave and are launched skyward in their supercharged Jesse James. The driver and the throttleman must react in tandem to each wave individually in order to get optimum performance from their machine and keep it under control. In this case, too much power coming off a wave put them at the wrong angle for re-entry into the water. Air gets under the boat and she rolls. Cockpit canopies saved both men's lives. In the same waters off the Florida Keys, a year later, Al Kropp and his teammate were boiling up the water in their Baja catamaran, Cat. During the course of the race, both of the tie rods that connect the outdrives and enable the driver to steer the boat had become disconnected. A very serious condition at any speed. They got no clue. Intent as they were winning the race, neither competitor noticed the problem until it was too late. The Cat team went from over 100 miles per hour to 0 in a bone-crushing impact that capsized their race boat. Imagine finding yourself strapped upside down underwater in the middle of the ocean. Offshore racers train to overcome disorientation and learn to exit the cockpit before they run out of air. In replay, you can see the race boat skips off a roller and the driver is unable to correct his course. The boat then turns broadside into the next wave and is overturned. An air rescue team plucked the crew from the water with relatively minor injuries, thanks once again to a cockpit canopy system. We move now to 1991. The blue-green waters off Marathon Key can appear deceptively serene as the crew of the custom skater catamaran Hyperactive found out the hard way. You can gauge by the distance that our photo chopper traveled after the impact just how fast the boat was going when it nosed into the water. The impact literally tore the boat in half, leaving the crew, Tom Slamecka and Dave Cutler, floating in the water with the debris. In replay, we can see exactly what happened. After the race boat launched into the air, her stern catches the next wave, which forces the bow down hard into a third wave. The impact rips open the deck, and the force of the water through the hull tears the boat in half. Bob Kaiser and Errol Lanier, who just moments before had been racing adversaries of the Hyperactive team, leapt from their race boat to help them into the water. Rescue teams then moved in to get the crew to safety, the most serious injury being some fractured ribs. Okay, it's time for the heavy metal of motorsports. The 10-foot-tall, 10,000-pound behemoths called monster trucks. These machines leave the line like a pro stock drag racer and leap 20 feet into the air over sets of crushed cars, all in search of low ETs. These racers thrill fans from coast to coast with their unique brand of motorsports excitement. And never was the old adage truer: the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Let's start the Monster Mash with action at the 93 Thunder Drags from Canfield, Ohio. Here's the Executioner, a 5-ton Chevy driven by Mark Hall. Now, the dirt here at the Canfield Fairgrounds also doubles as a tractor pulling course and is elevated just enough to give Hall and his Executioner an unexpected detour during qualifying. Kaboom! That's 10,000 pounds of race truck tumbling like a child's toy. The truck's body takes the rollover pretty hard, but the roll cage protecting the driver is intact. From this head-on replay, we see that just as the high hauler clears the crushed cars, the right rear tire slips down the embankment. Paul tries to save the big truck by cutting the wheel and increasing the power, but it's just not enough to keep it from going over. Mark Hall walked away from this qualifying incident, and after dusting off and putting his truck back on its wheels, went on to make the first round of competition. Amazing. From the heartland, we move way down south to Naples, Florida, and the world-famous Mile of Mud at the Florida Sports Park. The first-round matchup featured Wayne Smozanik of Jupiter, Florida, against the dreaded Bigfoot of Gene Patterson. Smozanik went all out to put on a good show for his home state fans. Unfortunately, this wasn't exactly what he had in mind. The Tropical Thunder does a nose stand, then crashes back down to earth, bringing the fence with it. Wayne was uninjured, protected by his machine's roll cage and safety harness, but his monster truck done for the day after this fence-clearing cartwheel. Let's look again. We see the big truck gets out of shape coming off the second set of cars and careens into the retention wall, shearing off the right front wheel. Then the Tropical Thunder topples over onto its front end, stands up and salutes the flag, then begins the slow descent back down through the fence. When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. To wrap up this look at monster truck mayhem, we have Don Banlieue qualifying in sloppy conditions at the Indy State Fairgrounds. The Magnum Force gets some big air and loses his left front wheel on impact. The big truck slides safely to a stop, and the 6-foot tire turns in a pretty respectable number. Banlieue was uninjured in the mishap, but had some concern about where his wheel went. Well, it was waiting for him in the parking lot after the event. Next up, stock cars dive side by side into the turns with the pack drafting in behind like a 200-mile-an-hour freight train. Nothing quickens the pulse quite like it, unless, of course, you see this happening ahead of you. Resembling a train wreck, 13 cars go sprawling across the Charlotte Motor Speedway after the mishap in Turn 1. When the smoke cleared, most of the Busch Grand National drivers had walked clear of the wreckage. The main concern was Chad Little and the number 23, who hit the wall hard. Little suffered a fractured leg and shoulder in an accident that could have caused much worse injury. Now look to the left of your screen in this replay. As the 3 cars try to squeeze around the turn, the 33 car of Bobby Labonte and Chad Little in the 23 get forced outside, impacting the wall at full speed. Little at a nearly head-on angle. Both cars then spin back into the pack, causing wholesale destruction. Other drivers involved included Dale Jarrett, Derek Cope, Tracy Leslie, Morgan Shepherd, and Sterling Marlin. This is the kind of an accident drivers describe as, well, that's just stock car racing. This aerial view gives us an idea just how widespread the destruction was. Right at the exit from pit row, 13 cars spin out of control, bouncing off the wall and each other. Now here you can see how momentum carries the 2 cars into the wall, then back into the pack, setting off the chain reaction. Watch the orange 72 of Tracy Leslie as he spins it into the inside retaining wall and right out into the path of Randy LaJoie's blue number 20. Of the 13 cars involved, 5 were able to return to the race. You know, NASCAR dictates that their cars be built so that the drivers can walk away. Now you're on board with Mark Martin as he's battling a cut tire and motioning the faster traffic to pass. Going into the big high bank turn, Martin gets nudged in the rear and is set into the wall. The Winston Cup competitors are caught with nowhere to go as Martin collects number 32 Dick Trickle and sets off a chain reaction. Here's the Bobby Helen view as he avoided the incident. Kyle Petty, Darrell Waltrip, and Rick Mast were just some of the big names that got into the melee along with Martin and Trickle. From this angle, you can see the number 3 car of many-time Winston champ Dale Earnhardt nudge Mark Martin's number 6 in the rear. At that point, there wasn't much Martin could do but just hold on. He gets turned around and watches as Trickle's Chevy slams him nearly head-on. The rest of the pack plays the guessing game of where are they going to go when I get there, ducking under the sliding cars. Some driving clear and some getting tangled up with other competitors who picked the same escape route. Here's how it looked and sounded in Mark Martin's Ford. Sounds like a pinball machine. Martin's car actually drove away from this one, further testifying to the safety in this sport. From Charlotte, we move to the 93 Daytona 500. On the backstretch on lap 169, two cars tangle and tap a third, sending it on a high-speed tumble in the infield of Daytona International Speedway. It's Rusty Wallace getting the worst of it as Derek Cope and Michael Waltrip slide to a stop in the grass. Here you can see just how quick Cope and Waltrip get together and send the unsuspecting Wallace into a terrifying high-speed tumble off the race course. It is also amazing to note, aside from the sheet metal, how intact Rusty's Pontiac stays, despite slamming repeatedly to the ground in this frightening high-speed end-over-end incident. As we take another look, we can see clearly that Michael Waltrip's yellow number 30 loses rear traction, forcing him into Cope's number 66. The two cars fall out of the draft and tag Wallace's machine, unleashing the uncontrolled fury of a Winston Cup car when it's upset at top speed. Want another look? You got it from Jeff Bodine's roof cam. As Waltrip and Cope get together, they push Wallace into a broadside slide at over 200 miles an hour. The air pressure suddenly rammed through the cockpit, punching out Rusty's windshield, which flies back and ricochets, boom, off of Bodine's roof. Amazingly, Rusty Wallace walked away from his wrecked car with no serious injuries. The world of AMA Supercross. Young gladiators in brightly colored armor beating themselves silly on dirt tracks for the fun and enjoyment of others. But seriously, these are some of the best conditioned athletes in all of motorsports. Lightning quick reflexes and iron-willed endurance are a must for a motocross racer. But before any of that will do you any good, you've got to get past the start. With so many riders in one place at one time, it's not at all unusual for an unplanned game of Twister to break out in the first corner. Let's see. Right foot blue, left hand red. The main object is to stay on course and on your bike, avoiding hay bales whenever possible. Understand, they designed these courses to make it as difficult as possible for even the best to keep it together. Now, knowing every rider is facing the same hardships and the next guy might just hit you instead of the bales, you want to pick up the bike as quick as possible and get the heck out of there. But all kidding aside, the sport of motocross is as demanding and dangerous as any form of motorsport. And unfortunately, Dan Chu found this out at the Daytona Supercross. First, Scott Sheet gets in too deep on his Kawasaki, but he bails before the point of no return. Dan Chu, coming up on the right in white, wasn't so fortunate. He rode his bike right into the ground, hard. Chu walked away, but neurological problems surfaced later, and after 9 long, hard, tough, brave months, Dan Chu motocrossed again.